Okay, so second part of today's class on exposure. So we're going to now annotate the poem, and if you could have a look at these next two slides, and then on the next slide there is another copy of the poem if you need it. And then pause and use these questions to help you start to analyse the poem. Okay, so you'll need to pause this here. I think what I'll do is I'll also send the PowerPoint if you need it. And then we have the next slide. So again, you can pause, rewind, fast forward, whatever you need, and then we have the poem. Okay, so if you can answer the questions, because I am going to go through each stanza, stanza by stanza from now. Okay, so pause now. Right, so you should have had a break, hopefully. You made a cup of tea, because that was quite a long activity. So let's have a look at stanza 1 here. So number 1, the poetic technique that's used in the first line. The poetic technique used in the first line is personification of the weather. It shows the brutality of nature here. The weather is described as merciless and attacking them with the phrase knife us. And this is unexpected, as we expect the fight to be between soldiers. So is the poet perhaps suggesting that nature is the true enemy here? Then the use of ellipsis signifies silence, waiting, and time dragging. And then number 3, additionally, the use of assonance here with we read, keep, night, silent, and the long vowel sounds and low drooping suggests the time is dragging. There's also a sense of a mournful and moaning sound here as well. And then the sibilant in the hissing S sound, silence, centuries whisper, curious, nervous, captures the noise of the wind and how it's essentially biting. It also is suggestive of whispering, trying to avoid being noticed by the enemy. In stanza 2, we've got tension being created here by the use of caesura. It slows down the pace of the poem. The gunnery rumbles suggests a sense of waiting here as well, and then added with the dull rumour of some other war. We've got the mad gusts of the wind show again the unpleasant and somewhat vicious conditions they're in. And again, you question, is nature the enemy? And then the rhetorical question here as well, what are we doing here, highlights the hopelessness of the soldiers at war. It's pointless. Now, think about it. Is this unpatriarchal as well, you know, with what we know about Wilfred Owen? In stanza 3, the poignant misery of dawn begins to grow. This shows an oxymoron here, as dawn is supposed to be hopeful and positive, not miserable. It suggests that even dawn brings no comfort, and dawn is like a curse and is referred to in this stanza as her. Is this Mother Nature? And the ellipsis at the end of the first line suggests waiting for an onslaught, which is essentially what they're doing. And then Owen personifies the weather, the dawn and the sunrise as an army, and battling against the night sky that is being replaced by the day. And the imagery of grey here represents death and the loss of life that night. And the adjective melancholy for the sunrise links to the idea of a depressing new day. There is also a refrain here, which is a repeated line as a metaphor for the poet's belief that war is a futile loss of life. Stanza 4, so we've got sibilants in line 1 and 2, and this has an onomatopoeic effect of making the sounds of the battlefield more relatable to the reader, bringing them into the narrative. And this adds to the rapid and dangerous nature of events that juxtapose the preceding calm. The personification of the air that shudders shows the hostile weather conditions as being more dangerous than the bullets. And alliteration and the rule of 3 are used in line 3. They show a never-ending kind of cyclical pattern to their lives. And the nonchalance of the wind suggests that it kills indiscriminately. It doesn't care everyone is the enemy. It doesn't care if you're German or you're British. And they're waiting on an unchanged landscape. Okay, and in stanza 5, we've got the personification of the weather in the first 2 lines, and this emphasizes its brutality and the suffering inflicted on the soldiers. The adjective stealth adds to this, which describes the weather as malicious and cunning, perhaps. Then we've got this half rhyme here, and it shows that the exposure is now set in. They're freezing to death with thoughts of pastoral England and they're thinking of home, but know that they will probably never get there. Stanza 6, so we've got the caesura again interrupting the rhythm and showing a sense of struggling. The fire is clearly precious to them here, like home fires, and there's hope in this memory. But then we've got a repetition which suggests that nobody back home wants to acknowledge what's happening in the war. And it also suggests that there's no chance to go home. And then in stanza 7, we've got a real sense of loss of faith in this stanza. The Christian ideal of giving up your own life to protect others is questioned here. And soldiers' belief of giving up themselves for their country is also questioned here. And finally, in stanza 8, so we've got his in the first line. It's referring to God. The first 2 lines depict the tragic death of the soldiers as they finally succumb to the elements. The frost is personified here as fastening the soldiers to the ground. And the soldiers have also been desensitized to seeing the dying and the dead here as well. And then the return to the original refrain, remember that's a repetition of a line, is cyclical here. Despite the agony the soldiers have been through, their death has been for nothing. Nothing has been achieved and nothing happened. Okay, so what I want to do on the next slide is have a look at structure and form. And I'm going to show you a clip on structure and form for the poem Exposure.
Hello everybody, welcome to this video, 2 minutes of revising the structure and form in one of the poems from Power and Conflict. Do check out the playlist to see the detailed analysis of each poem, but this is just a quick reminder of some of the key points of structure and form, since so many students find structure and form to be way too difficult. So I want to have a little look at the poem Exposure. Now, in terms of structure, each stanza has a very anticlimactic ending. So they start with these blunt and powerful statements, these sentences like, our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds that knife us. And these opening sentences are then followed by highly emotive vocabulary choices, wearied, confused, worried, curious, nervous. But after dramatically heightening the tensions, each stanza ends with an anticlimax, but nothing happens. And this 3-part structure is found in each stanza. This opening sentence, which is highly emotive, building up to nothing happening. And Owen wants his reader to empathize with how the soldiers felt, the anticlimactic waiting around nature of the war, as it is the weather that's killing them because they're not seeing any action in the war itself. There's also a repetitive rhyme scheme of A, B, B, A, C, again showing the repetitive nature of nothing changing in the war. And there's para-rhyme. There's rhyme, but they're not full rhymes. And this reflects the unease of the situation. Para-rhyme is where 2 end-of-line words contain the same consonant sounds, but not the same vowels. And we see this in our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds that knife us. Wearied we keep awake because the night is silent. And here we have worried by silence, sentries whisper, curious, nervous. So we can see that nivus is a para-rhyme with nervous. The consonant sounds n and s are the same, even though the vowels of I and are different. And the use of para-rhyme gives a permanent sense of being nervously on edge. The soldiers are denied the satisfaction of full rhyme, but are forced to be incomplete and imperfect. And the perfection and closure of full rhyme is denied to them. So a little bit more than 2 minutes. Do subscribe to the channel if you're finding these quick videos useful.
Okay, so that is the end of today's class on exposure. Thank you.